Evening, it's 6 o'clock, so we'll open the meeting of Cabinet. First of all, do we have any apologies for absence? Councillor Mushtaq, thank you very much. Do we have any urgent business? No urgent business. Any declarations of interest from members? I'll take silence to mean no. Public question time. Do we have any public questions? No. Okay, so item 5, the minutes of the Administration Budget PVFM Select Committee from the 24th of January. Councillor Jabbar, do you want to talk about these?
Yes, Chair, thank you. The budget proposals for the year 2019-20 went before the PVFM committee on the 24th, as you said. It was scrutinised in full details. And I'm very happy to say, Chair, that they've accepted all the recommendations that was in the report after a long meeting. So the minutes actually reflect that. They haven't changed any of the budget reduction proposals, which are obviously included in the paper in item 8. So I'm happy to take any questions anybody got any on any part of the minutes.
Do members wish to raise anything under item 5? No. No. Okay. Thank you. So those minutes noted. Thank you. Item 6, the minutes of the PVFM committee for the opposition budget proposals. Councillor Jabbar.
Thank you, Chair, again. So this meeting was held on the 11th of February. And again, the committee actually looked at all the proposal the Lib Dem were making for the financial year 2019-20. In essence, all the proposed budget reduction proposals were rejected, together with all the investment proposal. They're all rejected. But there were there were 3 things that the committee asked for us to look at during the financial year, if possible. One of them was the 106 review of car park. They proposed this previously, and they said if it's possible for us to look at that during the next financial year. The next one was 108 additional bus lane enforcement. Again, what they said was that as part of our rolling out of the enforcement program, could we consider this one as additional? And then the final one was the health centre in Crompton. The point was made that if it fits in with the council's priority, then could we look at that as a capital programme? Again, I'm quite happy to take any questions from anybody.
Thank you. I think it is worth highlighting because of the coverage that it received in the press and because it comes back every year. 102, the reduction in the number of councillors. In the notes of the minutes, it says that no saving would be achieved in 1920, and it's actually beyond our control. And that's not something that always comes out in the coverage of that. And I intend to make that point quite strongly at the council meeting when these proposals go forward. Do any other members wish to comment or observe on these minutes? No, thank you. Okay, so item 7, Revenue Monitor and Capital Investment Programme 2018-19. Councillor Jabbar?
Thank you, Chair. So, in essence, really, this is a regular report where we inform you what's happening with the revenue budget and also the capital budget. So this is the report at the end of month 8. We're predicting at the end of the financial year, end of March 2019, there will be a small surplus of £145,000. It also details areas of overspend, notably in children's services. That's on page 25, I think it is. It's showing still an overspend of 4.216 million. That's offset by the underspend that you've got in the capital programme. Basically, in the capital programme, at the beginning of the year that we were projecting over £89 million of spend, but actually to date, what we're forecasting is for 48.952 million. The reason for that is there's been a considerable slippage into the future years. So we haven't lost the unspent allocation, it's just that it's been spread over the future years rather than spending it in 18-19. So there's no major cause for concern in either of the two reports, Chair, both in the revenue and the capital programme. Happy to take any questions.
Do members have any questions or observations on this report? No. Thank you. Okay, in that case we'll move on to item 8, which is the revenue budget and medium-term financial strategy. Councillor Jabbar.
Thank you. So obviously this is the main report of the evening where we detail how we propose to set the budget for the financial year 2019-20. I don't know, Chair, whether you've seen a report today from the LGA. It's predicting that by year 2025, there will be a funding gap in the local government sector of £8 billion. In terms of how it impacts on us, well, I can tell you that next year there is a net £7.2 million there's a net £7.2 million reduction in our core funding from central government. So if you recall, when we set the budget for this financial year back in February 18, we were predicting an £18 million gap. Well, when we examined all the different numbers and the pressures that we were facing, the total gap increased to £22.2 million. And one of the main reasons for that was because of the reduction I've just mentioned in our business support grant of 7.2 million. So when people say that austerity is over and the pressure on local government is gone, that is clearly not the case, certainly not in Oldham. And we just need to remind people that we've already had 10 years of austerity in which we've lost over £208 million of funding. So in terms of addressing the issue before us, the report in front of you deals with how we managed to fund the gap and also where we use the funding, which element of funding that we use to plug the gap. So starting with increasing council tax, unfortunately, yet again, by 3.99. So by now, you'll be familiar that there is two elements of that increase. The first element is the general part, which is 1.99. And then the second element is the ring fence for adult social care of 2%. So that gives you a total of 3.99. Incidentally, we have got the opportunity to increase council tax, the general element, by a further 1%, but we chose not to because already council tax in Oldham is far too high. So on top of the council tax increases, unfortunately there are further increases in precepts like the police and the GM mayor. So if you take those elements into account, then the total council tax increase in Oldham will be around 5.3%, which I understand is not something what the people of Oldham want. But unfortunately, given the level of cuts that we're facing and have faced from government, we have no option but to do that. So on top of that, we have produced a saving within the council of £7.829 million. And the budget proposals which delivered those savings are actually in the papers, and they have been to PVFM and they've had a good look at it and they've been scrutinized properly. That sadly converts to a loss of 24.88 full-time equivalents posts. Those posts will be deleted from our establishment, but some of those posts are actually currently vacant, so I'm hoping that they don't equate to redundancy and certainly don't equate to compulsory redundancies. We will do our best to minimize compulsory redundancy. In fact, I think I can confidently say there won't be any compulsory redundancies. Now, rest of the figures are details in page 107. So we're having to use the flexibility in capital receipt, and then also there is what we call the collection fund surplus of 2.236 million. And then over the page, it gives you details of some of the reserves that we're using, including corporate reserves of nearly 6.2 million to balance the budget. So it's not something that's been done very lightly, Chair. It's been a very difficult task given the length of the austerity and the severe cuts that the local government sectors face, and particularly Oldham. As you know, previously I have said that Oldham has been the seventh hardest hit local authority in terms of the reduction from central government. Within the report, you've also got the fees and charges for next year, 2019-2020, as well as the pay policy within that. And then finally on page 53, we've got a full set of recommendations that we need to agree, all of the recommendations to comply with the various legislation to set the council tax at the council tax budget meeting on 27th of February. Obviously, there's a lot that I've covered in a short period of time. I'm quite happy together with the finance team and the chief executive to answer any questions any member have on these reports.
Thank you, Councillor Jabbar. Do any members wish to make any questions or observations on this agenda item? Councillor Jakes.
I think it's quite appalling that we here in Oldham and in Greater Manchester are asking people to pay an extra £24 for policing when central government don't really understand the indifference they have to the impact it has on our streets. Only this weekend it was reported that there was over 1,000 knife crimes to young people in 1 year. These people continue to cut without any reference to the social impact it has on our streets. 1,000 young people suffer from knife injuries in Britain this year. These are the real victims of the cuts to the services, and I think it's absolutely appalling that taxpayers have to pay yet again for a central service which should be provided by a government.
Thank you, Councillor Jakes. Of course, it's not just policing that's been passed on to local taxpayers here in Oldham. It's local authority budget itself, and it's adult social care, as we've seen too. So it's a trend that the government abdicates its responsibility on some quite serious issues, passes them on to local taxpayers, and often hits areas harder that don't have the tax base, but also have the highest demand. Councillor Jabbar, thank you for taking us through the report. Of course, this is subject to some significantly more debate at the council meeting, because the role of this committee tonight is to commend this to full council, where I'm sure there'll be plenty more administration members that will like to have their say on how hard Oldham has been hit by government cuts, disproportionately so compared compared to lots of other places around the country. And so, if there are no other questions or observations on this report, am I required to read out each recommendation in this? No, I don't know why I thought that was it.
Just to say that 1 to 13 on page 53, people are happy accepting those.
Okay, so the recommendations for this item are set out on page 53. Recommendations 1 to 13. Do Cabinet agree the recommendations? Agreed. Thank you. Okay, item 9, housing revenue account estimates and proposed outturn. Councillor Jabbar?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So this item deals with the account for next year for the housing revenue, but more than that, it sets out our policy to increase the rent for the homes that we own. So you'll recall that the social landlords have been asked to reduce their rent, but ours is exempt because our properties are funded through PFIs. So in line with government policy, we can increase our council rent, council homes rent by inflation plus 1%. So inflation that we take is in September. So September inflation was 2.4%. Add 1%, that gives you 3.4. So the rents are increasing by 3.4%. We're not increasing any service charges, and we've not done that for last 2 years. The only other thing I would say about this is that this was raised also at the PFEFM meeting, is that next year is actually a 53-week year, but Universal Credit only pay people's housing benefit for 52. So unless that is addressed by new legislation, then people who are on housing benefit will have 1 week's less housing benefit to cover the rent. So PVFM wanted us to look at that, and the recommendation in the report is for us to consider that to assist any tenant who falls into that situation if that occurs. So that's in the recommendation 8 on page 4 to 8. Yeah. Obviously, the Cabinet Member for Housing is here if she wants to add anything. Hannah Roberts.
Well, I suppose I think Councillor Jabbar has covered the issues which are raised in the report. I suppose it's the issue that on recommendation 8 around universal credit. I mean, it's just yet another example of how universal credit fails to meet people's needs, and we already have substantial numbers of people in Oldham who have been affected not just by the transition to universal credit, but a range of other welfare reforms, including the benefit cap. And I suppose as far as housing is concerned, there's a continuing and worsening issue about the gap between the amount that housing benefit pays in relation to the local housing allowance and what people's actual housing costs are. So people are being forced to pay a greater percentage of their incomes, which are already not sufficient to cover their needs, in order to keep a roof over their heads.
Thank you, Councillor Roberts. Councillor Jabbar, do you have anything to add?
No, just to really, focus on what Councillor Roberts just says. It's just another way of government squeezing people's disposable income, and that is putting enormous strain on families. And we've seen the consequences of that in Oldham. We've seen the increase in number of children being presented to the council to be looked after. And I'm absolutely convinced this is to do with some of the policy this government is actually implementing in our country.
Yes, and on the subject of universal credit, the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions today admitted that the rise in food bank uses because of the policy of universal credit. So government policy has been responsible for forcing people to turn to charity to feed themselves. I think that's shocking, considering that we're meant to be a developed country. Do Cabinet agree the recommendations as set out on page 428? Agreed. Thank you. Agenda item 10, capital strategy and capital programme. Councillor Jabbar.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So this is a bit more upbeat report. This is a report which gives you the ambition this administration has to invest in Oldham, to make changes, to create a better place for the resident of this borough. So we're proposing to invest over £260 million over the next 5 years. That represents a £43 million of net increase in the expenditure over the last plan. And I think this is, really an excellent program which sets out, as I said, our ambitious program. Despite all the cuts and all the pressures that we've got, I think this administration is standing up to the challenge that this town is facing. And this report details that. In the past, we've always had a capital program, but now there is a requirement to have a capital program as part of our financial regulations. So we made some tweaks to the report, but in essence, really, this is a report which sets out the activities we want to take over the next 5 years, concentrating obviously more on the next 2 years in detail.
Do members have any questions or observations on this report? Do members agree the recommendations as set out on page 447? Agreed. Thank you. Councillor Jabbar, item 11, Treasury Management Strategy Statement.
Okay, so this is a technical report, Chair. It's driven by our capital strategy. I can tell you that we have a good reputation in terms of managing our finances and treasury management. This report complies with all the statutory codes and regulations that we have. I'm more comfortable allowing officers answer a question on this paper than any other report. So obviously, Ray, Anne, and of course our Chief Executive are here to answer any detailed question, but just to tell you that everything is in order and we meet all the various requirements that's placed on us in terms of managing local government finance.
Do members have any questions or observations on item 11? Does Cabinet agree to the recommendations as set out on page 512? Agreed. Thank you. Item 12, the statement of the Chief Financial Officer on reserves. Councillor Jabbar? Or Anne?
It's Anne's report.
Oh, Anne, thank you.
Thank you. This is my report as Section 151 officer. I am required to make a report about the budget process and the budget arrangements under Section 25 of the Local Government Act 2003. So clearly that's what I'm including in my paper. So the paper looks at a number of issues. Firstly, the general level of balances, which have been calculated on a risk-based approach and are recommended at a value of £14.25 million for 2019-20. Secondly, the report looks at earmarked reserves, the level that we're anticipating for 2019-20, and the important part that they play in the financial resilience of the council. Thirdly, the report looks at the robustness of the estimates, and I'm able to advise that the estimates on which all the budget reports are based have been calculated in an appropriate manner. Fourthly, the report also advises that financial decisions in relation to capital spending have been addressed in a prudent and affordable manner. And finally, the report comments on issues around the financial resilience of the authority. And I'm able to advise that the approach to financial management that we have here in Oldham means that the budget has been appropriately prepared, is robust, and that we are in a position to meet the financial challenges that the authority faces. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Any questions or observations on this report? No. Okay. The recommendations are set out on page 558. Does Cabinet agree to the recommendations?
Agreed.
Thank you. So the final item is item 13, and this is the Council Tax Reduction Scheme for 2019-20. Councillor Jabbar?
Yes, thank you, Chair. As you know, that we're responsible for setting our own council tax scheme. This came in from April 2013. So we've done a detailed piece of consultation, and what we're proposing to you tonight is to continue with the 85% reduction on Band A properties, and then also making the scheme a little bit generous by disregarding people's income when they're on universal credit, and also more importantly is when we receive an information that somebody is on universal credit, then we take that as an application for council tax reduction. So overall, Chair, this is a bit more generous scheme than the previous year, and also we're auto-enrolling people into making a claim for council tax reduction if we know that they're on universal credit. Again, the questionnaire in here as part of the consultation is detailed in there. I'm happy to take any questions anybody's got.
Do members have any questions or observations on this report? Councillor Roberts.
Cabinet's attention to the table on page 6 to 8 towards the end of this report, which outlines the quite shocking increases in child poverty in the majority of wards in the borough, which directly results from the impact of the government's welfare reform policy. So, not to repeat the point I made earlier on about the local housing allowance, this also results from the below inflation increases in benefit payments and the cap on some families' welfare receipts. And I just think it's absolutely shocking to look at what this means. I mean, even the ward that I represent, Royton North, which is a relatively affluent ward in comparison to some of the rest of the borough, we now have 20% of our children who are living in poverty. And I know that this scheme has been designed to do what we can to help alleviate that, but I think this just shows the context within which we're working and the impact that government policy has had on many of our fellow residents.
I think it's important to highlight that, and it's what we've known for a long time, that government policy is pushing people into poverty, and particularly children. And of course, it took the UN to highlight that and make it make headlines in the way that it should have been making headlines for a number of years. And more people should have been more angry about how the government has actively made choices that have made children, forced children into poverty. But it's good. Thank you for highlighting, Councillor Roberts. I think on this report, the message to take away is that this council tax reduction scheme that we're proposing means that more people will be eligible, and also that it is easier to apply. And when these are some of the people that are on lowest incomes in the borough and some of our more vulnerable residents, I think any assistance that we can offer is welcome, though of course we would have preferred not to have had to have devised our local scheme and require these people to pay a toll had it been possible, and as it was before 2013. Do Cabinet agree to the recommendations as set out in the report? Agreed. Thank you. So that concludes the business of Cabinet.
Can I just say one word, please? I'm sorry. So these papers have gone to lots of different meetings. There's been lots of changes, lots of debate, lots of hard work. So I just want to thank everybody for their contribution, starting with my Cabinet colleagues, then the finance team led by Anne and Ray, the chief executive here, and all the officers and directors who've, been working really hard for about 7 months now to get to this stage. And trust me, right, it's been really hard. So I just want to place my thanks on record here tonight. But also, Chair, we often forget, and I forget, the work that committee services do, constitutional services do, led by Liz Drogan, who's here, and Paul. So because there's lots of papers in here, over 600 pages of papers, and they need to be in the right order, they need to be in the right section. So thank you to them as well, and please take back our thanks to all your team. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jabbar. Okay, so that concludes the meeting of Cabinet. Good night.